Dear learners, welcome back to WSE Cultural Legacy, where learning English is more than practicing words. It's about stepping into powerful stories that shape who we are. Today, let's enter the world of the samurai, a world of discipline, mystery, and a code of honor that guided warriors for centuries in Japan. Imagine a quiet dawn in medieval Japan. Mist curls across a field where two warriors stand still, their hands resting gently on the hilts of their swords. Yet, they do not rush into battle. Instead, there is silence, respect, and a sense of something deeper than victory or defeat. What force could make men hold such calm, even when death stood close? That force was called Bushido, the way of the warrior. We often think of samurai as fearless fighters in armor, but their story is more complex, filled with paradoxes. They were warriors, yet also poets. They could take life, yet were trained to cherish beauty in a falling cherry blossom. Their blades were sharp, but their spirits were bound by rules invisible to the eye. This hidden code shaped not only battles but also Japan's art, politics, and sense of identity. But here is the mystery: Bushido was never written as one single law. It was not signed by rulers or sealed with blood. It lived in the hearts and actions of those who followed it. How, then, did such an unwritten code survive across centuries, guiding the spirit of an entire class of people? And what lessons does it leave for us today? Before we begin unraveling this journey together, may I ask for a moment of your support? If you'd like to help us continue creating meaningful content, you are welcome to like, comment, share, or join our channel. Your support means a lot, and it keeps these stories alive. Now, let's step closer to the burning question: what is the real truth behind the spirit of the samurai, and why does it still speak to us in our modern lives? When we hear the word samurai, what image comes to mind? Perhaps a figure in shining armor, holding a sword that flashes like lightning. Or maybe we think of an ancient warrior who lives only for battle, someone who cares nothing for peace. But is this really the full truth? Or is it just a shadow of something much deeper? The central question we face is this: what exactly was the spirit of the samurai? Was Bushido simply a set of rules for soldiers, or was it a hidden philosophy that shaped an entire culture? At first glance, one might assume Bushido was only about loyalty to one's lord, fighting with courage, and dying without fear. And yes, these elements were there. But if we look closer, we find contradictions that refuse to be explained so easily. Why would warriors who carried sharp swords also spend hours writing poetry? Why would men trained to kill study calligraphy, tea ceremony, or the beauty of a garden? This paradox is what makes the samurai spirit so fascinating. It was not only about victory in war but about mastering the self. To be a samurai meant learning to control not just the blade, but the mind and the heart. Imagine this: a warrior standing in the storm of battle, yet calm inside, like a still pond. That was the ideal they chased. But here lies another puzzle. If Bushido was never a single written law, then how did it survive across generations? Without books or official rules, how could this invisible code remain strong enough to guide men through centuries of war and peace? Perhaps the answer lies not in strict rules but in living values, values passed from master to student, from parent to child, from stories whispered in the night to actions witnessed on the battlefield. Bushido was not taught like a school subject. It was absorbed, breathed in, lived through example. And yet, questions remain. Was Bushido truly a timeless code, or was it shaped and reshaped by those in power, each generation rewriting its meaning? Could it be that the spirit of the samurai is not one truth, but many layers of truth, some noble, some dark? Dear learners, let's pause here for a moment. If you had lived in that time, would you have found peace in such a code, or would you have felt trapped by its demands? This is not only a historical question, it is also a personal one. These burning questions lead us to the journey itself, the unfolding history of the samurai, the way Bushido emerged, and how it guided Japan through centuries of change. To understand the hidden code, we must first walk with the warriors themselves, from their earliest battles to the rise of their philosophy. To understand the spirit of the samurai, we need to travel back to a Japan very different from the one we know today. It was a land divided, where powerful families ruled their regions like small kingdoms, and emperors in Kyoto often held little real power. Out of this fractured world, the samurai were born. The word samurai itself comes from the verb saburao, which means to serve. At first, these warriors were not noble lords but armed retainers, hired to defend estates, lands, and treasures. They lived in a world of uncertainty, where loyalty was tested daily, and where survival meant choosing not only strength, but also allegiance. It was in this turbulent soil that the seeds of Bushido began to take root. By the late Heian period, in the 11th and 12th centuries, two great clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, rose to power. Their rivalry culminated in the Genpei War, 1180 to 1185, a conflict filled with dramatic battles and tragic heroes. One of the most legendary figures of this war was Minamoto no Yoshitsune, a warrior celebrated not only for his skill but for his grace and intelligence. His life became a model for the idea that a true warrior was more than a fighter, he was a figure of loyalty, refinement, and tragic beauty. With the victory of the Minamoto clan, Japan saw the birth of its first shogunate, led by Minamoto no Yoritomo. For the first time, real power shifted from the imperial court to a warrior government. The samurai were no longer just servants of aristocrats. They became the ruling class. This was the moment when the warrior's path began to shape the destiny of the nation itself. Yet life as a samurai was not only about war. In times of peace, their swords rested in their scabbards, and their attention turned inward. They practiced calligraphy, wrote poetry, and meditated in Zen temples. Zen Buddhism, arriving from China, became a spiritual backbone for many samurai. It taught them to embrace impermanence, to focus the mind, and to accept death without fear. The sword and the brush became twin symbols of their identity, tools for discipline, clarity, and expression. But history is rarely peaceful for long. Centuries later, during the Sengoku period, 1467 to 1603, Japan once again plunged into chaos. Warlords, known as daimyo, battled each other for control of the land. It was during this age of fire and blood that some of the most famous samurai leaders emerged, men like Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. Each of them not only fought for power but also shaped the meaning of loyalty and discipline in their own way. Nobunaga was ruthless, a master of strategy who embraced innovation, such as firearms, to break old traditions. Hideyoshi rose from humble origins, showing that skill and ambition could elevate a man to the highest rank. And Ieyasu, patient and calculating, built a dynasty that would rule Japan for more than 250 years. Together, their stories show us that Bushido was not frozen in time but evolved through conflict, ambition, and the choices of extraordinary individuals. When Tokugawa Ieyasu finally unified Japan in the early 17th century, the country entered a long era of peace under the Tokugawa shogunate. With battlefields quiet, the samurai faced a new challenge: how to live as warriors in a world without war. Many turned even more to philosophy, ritual, and the refinement of inner discipline. Bushido, once a matter of survival, became a code of honor and moral conduct, guiding not only the sword but also daily life. And here lies one of the most powerful transitions in history. A class of fighters became guardians of culture. Their armor stood in display, their swords were polished but rarely used, and their pens recorded poems, rules, and reflections. In this shift, the samurai spirit moved from the battlefield into the fabric of society itself. Dear learners, as we walk through this journey, can you feel the paradox? The same warriors who once brought chaos and fire now became symbols of order and discipline. This tension between violence and beauty, destruction and refinement, is what makes the history of the samurai not just a tale of war, but a mirror of human struggle. From the rise of the first clans to the long peace of the Tokugawa, the spirit of Bushido unfolded like a story written across generations, sometimes fierce, sometimes fragile, but always carrying that hidden thread of honor. Yet to truly grasp its meaning, we must look behind the curtain, to the forces, motives, and beliefs that shaped this code into something greater than a warrior's rulebook. On the surface, Bushido looked like a warrior's simple oath, loyalty to one's lord, courage in battle, and acceptance of death. But history rarely lives only on the surface. Beneath the armor of the samurai lay hidden forces, spiritual, political, and cultural, that gave Bushido its true power. One of the deepest influences came from Zen Buddhism. For the samurai, Zen was not about retreating to mountains or living as monks. It was about discipline of the mind. Zen meditation trained them to remain calm under pressure, to breathe deeply even when surrounded by chaos. A warrior who panicked could not survive. A warrior who embraced impermanence could face death without fear. This spiritual layer of Bushido gave meaning to the samurai's readiness to die, not as an act of despair, but as a way of transcending fear itself. Shinto beliefs also shaped the code. The Shinto view of nature as sacred meant that life was woven with invisible threads of respect and purity. When a samurai admired cherry blossoms falling, he was not just enjoying beauty. He was seeing a symbol of life's fragility, a reminder that all glory fades, and therefore must be lived with intensity and honor. The rituals of cleansing, of seasonal festivals, and of respect for ancestors kept Bushido connected not only to war, but to the spirit of Japan itself. Yet we cannot ignore the political forces behind Bushido. During the Tokugawa shogunate, peace had turned warriors into bureaucrats. Many samurai no longer fought battles, but worked as administrators, teachers, and officials. For them, Bushido became a tool of control. It reminded them of their duty to the shogun, even in times of boredom and frustration. By teaching loyalty, obedience, and honor, the Tokugawa rulers ensured that the warrior class remained disciplined, not rebellious. In this sense, Bushido was more than a philosophy, it was also a social strategy, a way to stabilize power for centuries. Economic forces also played a hidden role. As peace stretched on, many samurai found themselves struggling with money. They lived by strict codes that prevented them from farming or trading, yet their stipends were often too small. In these difficult conditions, Bushido became both a burden and a lifeline. A burden, because it demanded sacrifice without reward. A lifeline, because it gave meaning to lives that might otherwise feel empty. For a samurai who could not prove himself in battle, proving himself through loyalty, honesty, and personal discipline was a way to keep dignity alive. Then came the intellectual forces. Confucianism, with its emphasis on hierarchy, duty, and morality, blended into Bushido. It reinforced the idea that a warrior must serve his lord as a son serves a father, with absolute devotion. It also linked Bushido to education and ethics, turning the samurai class into leaders not only of armies but of communities. This merging of Confucian ethics, Zen spirituality, and Shinto tradition created a unique web of values, neither purely religious nor purely political, but something that touched every aspect of life. And behind all of this were personal motives. Samurai were not perfect icons. They struggled with ambition, fear, love, and pride, just like anyone else. Some embraced Bushido sincerely, while others used its language to hide personal gain. There were lords who demanded loyalty, but betrayed their own men. There were warriors who recited poems about peace, yet carried out brutal acts. The contradictions reveal that Bushido was never a single, unchanging truth, but a living, shifting idea. Consider the ritual of seppuku, or ritual suicide. To outsiders, it seems shocking and cruel. But within the hidden logic of Bushido, it carried profound meaning. It was not only a way to atone for failure, it was also a statement of integrity, a declaration that honor was more valuable than life itself. Political leaders encouraged this practice, knowing that it bound warriors more tightly than any written law could. At the same time, the act revealed the psychological weight placed on samurai shoulders. Behind the proud image of the warrior stood a deep, often painful demand to place duty above the self, no matter the cost. This hidden code also influenced art and aesthetics. The tea ceremony, for instance, was not merely about drinking tea. It was about harmony, respect, and the practice of patience. For the samurai, it was training in discipline without violence, a mirror of Bushido's demand to find order in the smallest actions. The art of the swordsmith, crafting blades with devotion, reflected the same spirit, a belief that true strength comes from perfecting one's craft, not rushing to display it. Dear learners, can you see how the spirit of Bushido was never just about swords or battles? It was a tapestry woven from faith, politics, economy, and daily ritual. And like all tapestries, if you pull one thread, the picture begins to change. So the question emerges, was Bushido a philosophy of noble ideals, or was it a system designed to control and discipline an entire class of people? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps that is why the spirit of the samurai still fascinates us today, because it shows us how power and philosophy can merge, how ideals can be both genuine and manipulated. As we peel back these layers, we are left with the realization that Bushido is not simply history. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's search for meaning, dignity, and control. And it leads us naturally to the next part of our journey, the human stories themselves, the emotions, sacrifices, and lived experiences of the samurai who carried this code in their blood. Behind the polished armor and sharp swords, the samurai were human beings, shaped by hope, fear, and longing. To understand Bushido fully, we must step into their daily lives and imagine what it meant to carry such a heavy code on one's shoulders. Consider the story of the 47 Ronin, perhaps the most famous tale of samurai loyalty. In the early 18th century, their lord was forced to commit seppuku after a conflict with a corrupt official. Masterless, these samurai could have abandoned their code. Instead, for nearly 2 years they lived in patience, disguising their true intentions. When the moment came, they struck swiftly, killing the man who had dishonored their master. Afterwards, knowing what Bushido demanded, they turned themselves in and accepted death by their own hands. In this story, we see the paradox of Bushido, an act both violent and loyal, tragic and inspiring. It was not only about revenge but about proving that honor could outlive life itself. But not all samurai stories were about glorious loyalty. Many struggled silently under the weight of expectations. Some lived in poverty during times of peace, forced to sell their swords or write letters for commoners to survive. Imagine the inner conflict of a man born to fight, who instead spent his days copying documents in a dusty office. For such men, Bushido was both a burden and a comfort, a reminder that their worth was not measured only by money or power, but by the integrity with which they lived. Others found solace in the arts. Samurai often practiced haiku poetry, where a few short lines could capture vast emotions. A warrior might write about the sound of rain, the flight of a bird, or the moment before dawn. In these simple images, they found a way to express feelings they could not show in battle. One haiku written by a samurai facing death reads, "A cicada's cry. No sign it will soon be gone. So fragile, this world." Here, we see not fear, but acceptance. The human voice of the samurai is softer than we might expect, and it tells us that Bushido was not only about toughness, but about grace in the face of impermanence. Families, too, carried the weight of the code. Wives and children of samurai lived with the constant possibility of loss. A wife might see her husband walk out the door, knowing he could die before sunset. Sons were trained from a young age not only in swordsmanship but in obedience, silence, and endurance. For them, Bushido was not an abstract philosophy, it was the rhythm of everyday life. Ideologies clashed as well. Some samurai believed in absolute loyalty to their lord, even if it meant cruelty to others. Others questioned, was it right to obey blindly? Could true honor also mean defying an unjust command? These tensions created debates within the warrior class, showing that Bushido was never a single voice but a chorus of conflicting emotions. One example of this conflict came in the late 19th century, during the Meiji Restoration, when Japan modernized rapidly and the samurai class was abolished. Many samurai felt betrayed, stripped of identity and purpose. Some resisted with rebellion, like Seigo Takamori, remembered as the last true samurai. He fought against the new government, believing it had abandoned the spirit of Bushido. His death marked both an end and a beginning, the closing of one era, but also the rebirth of Bushido as an idea that could survive without warriors. Dear learners, let us pause here. Can you imagine living with such contradictions, carrying both a sword and a poem, ready to die but also longing to live? Would Bushido feel like a prison, or like a compass that gave your life meaning? These human stories remind us that Bushido was not an abstract code carved in stone. It was lived, questioned, and reinterpreted every day. Some embraced it with pride. Others bent beneath its weight. And yet, through joy and sorrow, the spirit of the samurai endured, not because it was perfect, but because it spoke to the eternal human desire for honor, belonging, and purpose. And so, as we move forward, we turn from the lives of the past to our own world today. What can we, living in the 21st century, learn from this hidden code of honor and discipline? How does Bushido still whisper lessons for our daily struggles and dreams? The world we live in is very different from medieval Japan. Most of us no longer carry swords, wear armor, or pledge loyalty to a feudal lord. And yet, the spirit of Bushido still feels alive. Why? Because beneath the rituals of the past lies a set of timeless lessons that speak to challenges we face even now. At its heart, Bushido teaches discipline. The samurai train not only their bodies but their minds, learning to stay calm even in the most dangerous situations. In our modern lives, we may not face swords on the battlefield, but we do face storms of stress, uncertainty, and conflict. Here, discipline becomes a shield. Whether it's the discipline to keep learning, to finish what we start, or to remain steady in moments of fear, this lesson from Bushido is as relevant today as it was centuries ago. Another lesson is integrity. For the samurai, honor was more valuable than life itself. While such an extreme view may not fit the modern world, the essence still matters. Integrity means acting in a way that matches our values, even when no one is watching. It means being honest in small things, in our work, our relationships, our studies. In a time when shortcuts and distractions are everywhere, integrity becomes a rare kind of strength. Bushido also teaches us about balance. The samurai lived with paradox. They carried weapons of death, but they also wrote poetry and cherished beauty. They remind us that true strength is not about being hard all the time. It is about knowing when to be firm and when to be gentle, when to act and when to pause. In a fast-moving world, this balance can help us avoid burning out, reminding us that power without compassion is incomplete. There is also the lesson of impermanence. Zen Buddhism, woven into the samurai spirit, taught that life is fleeting, like a falling cherry blossom. This can sound sad, but it is also freeing. When we accept that time is short, we stop wasting it. We live more fully, love more deeply, and give our best while we can. This awareness transforms even ordinary moments into opportunities for meaning. But perhaps the most powerful lesson of Bushido is the question it asks each of us: what do you live for? For the samurai, the answer was service to their lord, their family, and their honor. For us, the answer may be different. It could be service to community, the pursuit of knowledge, or the care of loved ones. The form changes, but the challenge remains, to find a purpose worth dedicating ourselves to. Dear learners, let me ask you, if you were to write your own code of honor for your life, what values would you include? Which virtues would you fight for, even when things are difficult? These are not just historical questions. They are personal ones that invite us to think about the kind of person we want to be. By reflecting on the samurai's code, we are reminded that learning English, too, is not only about grammar or vocabulary. It is about persistence, patience, and discipline, the very qualities that Bushido honored. Every new word you learn, every effort you make, is a step on your path. And just like the samurai, your journey is not only about reaching a goal but about who you become along the way. The awakening, then, is simple but profound. Bushido is not a relic of the past. It is a mirror held up to our present. It asks us to be strong but compassionate, disciplined but balanced, realistic yet hopeful. It shows us that honor is not about fame or status but about living in alignment with our deepest values. And as we hold these lessons close, we begin to see how the spirit of the samurai still walks among us, not in armor, but in the quiet choices we make every day. Even though the samurai class was officially dissolved in the late 19th century, their spirit never truly vanished. Instead, Bushido lingered like an echo, weaving itself into Japan's identity, culture, and even global imagination. In Japan, Bushido values were carried into modern institutions. The idea of discipline and loyalty became central in schools, the military, and even business culture. The seriousness with which many Japanese companies approach teamwork and dedication can be traced, in part, to this warrior spirit. Some critics argue that this continuation brought pressure and conformity, while others see it as a source of unity and resilience. The debate itself shows how Bushido is not a closed chapter but a living influence. Beyond Japan, the image of the samurai traveled far. Films, novels, and games brought their stories into global culture, sometimes romanticizing them, sometimes questioning them. To many, the samurai represent purity of purpose, men and women who lived by principles larger than themselves. Yet, at the same time, questions remain. Were the samurai noble guardians of honor, or were they enforcers of a strict and often cruel system? Perhaps they were both. The lingering mysteries of Bushido lie here. It was never a single truth. It shifted with time, adapted to needs, and left behind not clarity but layers of meaning. Did the samurai truly live by the ideals we celebrate, or were those ideals polished later, turned into legend? The answer may never be certain. And maybe that uncertainty is part of the spirit's power. It invites us to reflect, to argue, to imagine. Today, when cherry blossoms fall each spring across Japan, many still see them as symbols of Bushido, beauty, fragility, and the courage to face impermanence. The samurai no longer walk among us, but their presence lingers in language, in ceremony, in quiet values of respect and persistence. The echo of the samurai reminds us that history is not just about the past. It continues to shape us, to whisper questions about who we are and what we live for. The code of Bushido may never be fully understood, but perhaps that is its gift, a mystery that keeps calling us back to reflect on honor, duty, and the meaning of a disciplined life. Dear learners, we have walked together through centuries of history, following the spirit of the samurai, from the battlefields of medieval Japan to the quiet rituals of tea, from loyalty and sacrifice to the lingering echoes of Bushido in our modern lives. There is an old samurai saying, "The way of the warrior is found in death." At first, it sounds dark, even unsettling. But its deeper meaning is not about seeking death, but about learning to live with the awareness of life's fragility. When we no longer fear the end, we can devote ourselves fully to the present, to our duty, to our values, and to the people we love. The spirit of Bushido, then, is not a relic locked in museums. It is an invitation. It asks us to reflect on the code that guides our own lives. What principles shape your choices? What values do you want to carry with you, even when the path becomes difficult? History leaves us with mysteries, but it also leaves us with mirrors. The samurai faced paradoxes, strength and softness, discipline and beauty, duty and desire. And in those paradoxes, we may see our own struggles reflected. For who among us does not wrestle with balance, with loyalty, with the challenge of living true to ourselves? As we close this story, I leave you with a question. If you were to write your own Bushido, your own way of honor and discipline, what would it look like? Would it be built on courage, kindness, patience, creativity, or something else entirely? And how might that personal code help you face the storms of life? Thank you for sharing this journey. If this story moved you, if it helped you learn not only English but something deeper about history and humanity, please support our work by liking, commenting, sharing, or joining. Your support means more than words, it keeps these stories alive. Until next time, dear learners, may the spirit of honor and balance walk beside you.